My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 69 years old. Last Thursday morning, the branch manager at my bank looked me straight in the eyes and quietly asked, "Mrs. Whitmore, did you really authorize your daughter to take complete control of your finances?" I smiled. Not because I found the question amusing, because I had never signed a single document. Someone else had. The young teller standing beside her suddenly stopped typing. The manager looked down at the paperwork one more time, then back at me. "I think we'd better move this conversation somewhere private." I picked up my purse, straightened my jacket, and followed her into the office. By the time I walked out 40 minutes later, I knew two things. Someone had spent months trying to convince the world I was losing my mind, and they had made one mistake. Just one. The kind of mistake only someone who had spent 34 years auditing forged signatures and fraudulent financial records would ever notice. That single mistake destroyed everything they had built. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever discovered that betrayal doesn't arrive wearing a stranger's face, but the face of someone you've loved your entire life, then you'll understand exactly how this story begins. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. My house sits on a quiet street lined with ancient live oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Tourists stop every spring to photograph the neighborhood. To them, it's history. To me, it's simply home. My late husband, Arthur, and I bought the house 38 years ago. Back then, the paint was peeling, the porch leaned slightly to one side, and half the windows wouldn't open. Everyone told us we were making a mistake. Arthur just smiled and said, "Anything worth keeping usually needs a little work." He was right. About the house. About most things. Arthur passed away 6 years ago after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. The silence afterward felt heavier than grief. Grief eventually softens. Silence learns where you keep your memories. People assume living alone means being lonely. They're wrong. Loneliness isn't measured by how many people live in your house. It's measured by how many people still tell you the truth. For 34 years, I worked as a senior auditor for a federal oversight agency. My job wasn't glamorous. No television cameras, no dramatic arrests. Most days were spent surrounded by contracts, invoices, expense reports, and signatures. Thousands of signatures. You'd be surprised what people reveal when they think no one is paying attention. A forged date, an invoice submitted twice, a number typed in a slightly different font. Most fraud doesn't begin with millions of dollars. It begins with one tiny decision that no one notices. My entire career depended on noticing. Even now, retired for almost 5 years, old habits refuse to disappear. Every receipt has its folder. Every important letter is scanned before it's filed. Every financial statement is reviewed the day it arrives. Some people collect photographs. I collect documentation. Not because I expect trouble, because evidence has a much better memory than people do. Every morning follows almost exactly the same rhythm. Coffee at 6, newspaper on the porch. 30-minute walk before Charleston becomes too warm. Water the roses. Arthur planted. Breakfast while listening to classical radio. Routine isn't boring. Routine lets you notice when something changes, and something had changed. It started with Danielle. My daughter began calling far more often than usual. At first I appreciated it. She asked whether I'd eaten, whether I was sleeping well, whether I needed groceries. It sounded thoughtful, maybe even overdue. Danielle had always been ambitious. As a child, she organized lemonade stands with handwritten budgets. As an adult, she became one of Charleston's most successful luxury real estate agents. She worked constantly. Her phone rarely stopped ringing, so when she suddenly found time to check on me every other day, I assumed she was trying to reconnect. I wanted to believe that. Then she began asking different questions. "Have you remembered to take your medication today?" "I did." "You didn't seem sure." I laughed. "I've been taking the same blood pressure pill every morning for 12 years. She laughed too, but not quite naturally. A week later, she visited with her husband, Scott. He carried flowers. Danielle carried concern. While I made coffee, she wandered through the kitchen, opening cabinets, looking inside drawers, studying paperwork on the counter. Almost casually, she asked, "Where do you keep your important documents these days?" I looked up from the coffee maker. "My filing cabinet? The old gray one? Still works perfectly," she smiled. "You should probably get something more secure." I poured the coffee. "This one has survived 4 presidents and 3 office relocations." Scott laughed politely. Danielle didn't. Instead, she changed the subject so quickly that most people wouldn't have noticed. Most people. I wasn't most people. Questions are never random, not from experienced salespeople, and certainly not from my daughter. 2 days later, my granddaughter Olivia stopped by after classes. She was 21. Bright, curious, always carrying either a notebook or a camera. She wanted to become an investigative journalist. Sometimes I joked that she'd inherited my habit of asking uncomfortable questions. She always answered, "Someone has to." We spent the afternoon trimming roses in the backyard. Halfway through, she hesitated. "Grandma?" "Yes? Can I ask you something?" "You just did." She smiled. Then the smile disappeared. "My mom keeps asking whether you've been forgetting things." I set the pruning shears down. "Does she?" Olivia nodded. "She asked if you'd ever gotten lost driving home." I stared at the rosebush for several seconds. "No. She also asked whether you've started repeating stories." That caught my attention. Everyone repeats stories. Families are built on repeated stories. But the way Olivia asked suggested someone was keeping score. I forced a smile. "Your mother worries too much." Olivia didn't answer. She simply looked away. And for the first time in years, I wondered whether Danielle's questions weren't really questions at all. They were building something. I just didn't know what. Not yet. That evening, after Olivia left, I stood in my study for a long time. The room hadn't changed much since I retired. The oak desk Arthur built by hand still sat beneath the window. The filing cabinets lined one wall, 4 gray cabinets, each drawer labeled taxes, insurance, property, investments. Old habits don't disappear because your career ends. They simply become quieter. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out my annual financial review folder. Every January, I spent one afternoon reviewing every account, every insurance policy, every investment statement. Not because anyone required it, because that's what 34 years of auditing teaches you. If something is wrong, you'll find it while it's still small. I flipped through the pages. Everything appeared normal. Checking account, savings, brokerage account, property taxes, nothing missing. Nothing unusual. Still, something felt different, not on paper, in people. The next morning, Danielle called before 8. She almost never called before work. "Morning, Mom. You sound cheerful. I've been thinking." "That can be dangerous," she laughed. Again, half a second too late. "I wanted to come by this weekend." "For dinner?" "Actually," she paused, "I thought maybe we could organize some of your paperwork." I looked across the room toward the filing cabinets. "My paperwork is already organized." "I know." Another pause. "I just thought maybe we could simplify things." "Simplify what?" "You know." She searched for the words. "In case something ever happened." I leaned back in my chair. "What exactly do you think is going to happen?" "Oh, nothing," she answered too quickly. "I'm just trying to help. I've managed my finances for almost 50 years." "I know. And before that, I audited other people's." "I know. So why would I suddenly need help now?" Silence. Only for a second. But silence answers questions words often avoid. She finally said, "I just worry about you." I smiled into the phone. "Thank you." Then I changed the subject. By the time we hung up, neither of us believed the conversation had gone well. Saturday afternoon, they arrived together. Danielle, Scott, and 3 expensive bakery boxes. Scott kissed my cheek. Danielle hugged me, longer than usual, almost as if someone might be watching. We ate lunch on the back porch. Charleston was unusually quiet that afternoon. The breeze moved slowly through the oak trees. For nearly an hour, everything felt normal. Scott talked about the housing market. Danielle complained about difficult clients. I told them Olivia had won another journalism award. Then Danielle suddenly asked, "Mom, where's your will?" Scott stopped chewing, only for a moment, but I saw it. People think noticing details requires effort. It doesn't. Once you've spent decades looking for them, your brain refuses to stop. My attorney has it. You still use Benjamin Lawson? I do. I heard he's thinking about retiring. I'll retire before he does. Scott laughed. Danielle didn't. She picked up her iced tea. Maybe it's time to update everything. My will? Your trust. My insurance. My medical directives. My power of attorney. She listed them as though she'd rehearsed the order. Interesting. Very interesting. I reviewed all of those 6 months ago. Oh, she looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know. No, I replied quietly. You didn't. Scott quickly changed the conversation to football. Too quickly. When they left, I walked them to the driveway. Danielle hugged me again. Promise you'll call if you need anything. I always do. She smiled, then glanced toward my study window. Not the porch, not the garden, the study, where my filing cabinets were. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. Monday morning, I drove to the grocery store. Nothing unusual. Milk, coffee, fresh fruit. The cashier recognized me. We chatted for a few minutes. I paid, or tried to. My debit card declined. I frowned. That's strange. The cashier smiled politely. It happens. I tried again. Declined. I reached for my credit card. Also declined. Now I knew something wasn't right. Not because both cards failed, because they had never failed before. Never. I paid with cash, drove home, and immediately called the bank. After answering 3 security questions, the representative sounded unusually cautious. Mrs. Urases. Whitmore, yes? I'm afraid I can't discuss your accounts over the phone. Why not? There are additional notes attached to your profile. What kind of notes? I'm sorry. I really think you should visit your local branch. The line went quiet. She sounded nervous, almost afraid of saying the wrong thing. I thanked her, hung up, and sat perfectly still. Auditors develop an unusual habit. When something unexpected happens, they don't react immediately. They stop moving. Because emotion clouds observation. Observation solves problems. I replayed the conversation in my head. Additional notes. Not fraud, not suspicious activity. Notes. Someone had added information to my banking profile. Information important enough that an employee refused to discuss it over the phone. That wasn't normal. It wasn't even close to normal. That evening, Olivia called. Her voice sounded different, less cheerful. Grandma, what's wrong? I probably shouldn't tell you this. My stomach tightened. Tell me anyway. I overheard Mom talking to Dad. She lowered her voice. They didn't know I was upstairs. I waited. Scott asked, "Do you think she's starting to believe it?" I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. And then? Olivia swallowed. Mom said, "She doesn't have to believe it." Another pause. "Everyone else just has to." I didn't answer, not because I didn't know what to say, because I suddenly understood something terrifying. This wasn't concern. This wasn't overprotective parenting. This was a strategy, a carefully planned one. And for the first time, I began to wonder just how long my daughter had been preparing it. I barely slept that night. Not because I was frightened. Fear is loud. This was something different. It was the quiet feeling that arrives when pieces you've been ignoring suddenly begin fitting together. Danielle's questions, the sudden interest in my paperwork, the bank, Olivia's phone call. None of them meant much on their own. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns were my specialty. For 34 years, I had investigated organizations where nothing looked suspicious until you stepped back far enough to see the entire picture. Fraud almost never announces itself. It whispers. One missing receipt, one altered signature, one unusual request, then another, and another. Eventually, the whispers become a conversation. I had finally started listening. The next morning, I drove to my bank. The Charleston Heritage Bank branch sat exactly where it had for almost 20 years. Brick building, white columns, the same flower beds by the entrance. I'd known most of the employees for years. Linda Hayes, the branch manager, greeted me before I reached her office. She smiled politely, but something about her expression felt rehearsed. Mrs. Whitmore. Good morning, Linda. Would you mind coming into my office? I was hoping you would ask. She closed the door behind us. Neither of us spoke immediately. She opened my customer profile on her computer, then folded her hands. I've reviewed your accounts personally. So have I. She nodded. There are no problems with your balances. I didn't think there were. She looked relieved that I understood the difference. The issue isn't your money. What is it? Another pause. There are concerns attached to your customer profile. Concerns from whom? I'm not authorized to disclose that. I understand. She seemed surprised. Most people argue. Auditors don't. We wait. People usually volunteer more information than they intended. Linda looked at the monitor again. The recommendation states that future financial decisions should involve a trusted family member. I said nothing. She continued. It also mentions possible memory impairment. There it was, finally, out in the open. I leaned slightly forward. Linda, yes? Have you personally observed me behaving as though I suffer from memory impairment? She blinked. No. Have I ever failed a security verification here? No. Have I ever appeared confused during any transaction? No. She answered every question without hesitation. So, these concerns, I said calmly, didn't originate with the bank? No. They were reported. Yes, my heartbeat remained steady. Inside, however, every alarm I possessed had just gone off. Linda slid a document across the desk. I'm not supposed to show you this. I looked down. Someone had submitted a request asking the bank to place additional monitoring on my accounts due to concerns about declining cognitive ability. No diagnosis, no physician, no court order, only statements. Reported confusion, reported forgetfulness, reported poor financial judgment. The wording sounded strangely professional, almost prepared. I read every line twice, then looked at the signature page. There wasn't one. Interesting. Very interesting. Someone wanted the bank to become suspicious without taking legal responsibility for making the accusation. That wasn't emotional. That was strategic. Exactly the kind of strategy people use when they expect to escalate later. Linda lowered her voice. Mrs. Whitmore, yes? I shouldn't tell you this. I smiled faintly. Those are usually the most important things. She looked toward the closed office door. This wasn't submitted by a government agency. I assumed that. It came from a family consultation. My eyes remained on hers. Your daughter came in. I felt something inside me settle. Not break, settle, like the final piece of a puzzle locking into place. Was she alone? Linda hesitated. No. Who was with her? A man, I already knew. But I asked anyway. My son-in-law. She nodded. They said they were worried about you. Of course they had. Concern is the perfect disguise. Nobody questions concern. As I stood to leave, Linda stopped me. There is one more thing. I turned back. They asked whether anyone else had access to your safe deposit box. Now I froze. Not visibly. Inside. Very few people even knew I had one. Arthur knew. Benjamin Lawson knew. Danielle shouldn't have. I smiled politely. No one does. Linda looked relieved. Good. Then she quietly added, I don't think whatever is happening is over. Neither did I. Instead of driving home, I turned toward downtown Charleston. Benjamin Lawson's office occupied the second floor of a century-old brick building overlooking the harbor. He had represented Arthur and me for over 25 years. I trusted him because he disliked surprises almost as much as I did. His receptionist smiled. "Mrs. Zeerzy? Yeah." "Whitmore, is Benjamin available? For you?" She picked up the phone. "He always is." Benjamin looked exactly as he had 5 years earlier. Gray suit, silver hair, perfectly organized desk. He stood as I entered. "You don't usually come without calling." "No, I assume that's bad. I hope not." He waited while I sat down, then asked only one question. What happened? I told him everything. Every phone call, every conversation, the bank, Olivia, Danielle, Scott. He never interrupted. Never once. When I finished, he slowly removed his glasses. "Clara, yes? When was the last time you reviewed your estate documents?" 6 months ago. "And your power of attorney?" "Same day." He nodded. "Good." I frowned. "Why good?" "Because if someone is preparing to challenge your legal capacity," he leaned forward, "they usually begin by learning exactly what they're trying to replace." The room suddenly felt much quieter. Benjamin continued. "I think your daughter isn't trying to take your money." "Then what?" "I think she's trying to convince other people you're no longer capable of controlling it." I stared at him. That distinction changed everything. One was theft. The other was far more dangerous. Benjamin opened a legal pad and wrote 3 words in careful block letters. "Gather. Don't confront. Yet." He slid the pad across the desk. "If they're building a case." He looked directly into my eyes. "Let them finish building it." I read the words twice, then folded the page and slipped it into my purse. Because I had spent 34 years telling investigators the exact same thing. Never interrupt someone in the middle of a fraud. The biggest mistake, almost always, comes right before they think they've won. And somehow, I had the unmistakable feeling that my daughter's biggest mistake was still ahead. Benjamin's advice echoed in my mind all the way home. Gather. Don't confront. Yet. Every instinct as a mother wanted to call Danielle, to demand answers, to believe there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Every instinct as an auditor told me something else. People who build deception rarely stop because they're confronted. They stop when they run out of lies. I intended to let that happen naturally. The following week, I became a different version of myself, not colder, more observant. Danielle called every morning. I answered every call. She asked whether I'd remembered breakfast, whether I'd paid my utility bill, whether I needed help balancing my accounts. Each question sounded harmless, until you realized every answer established a narrative. I began writing them down. Date, time, exact wording, her tone, Scott's name whenever she mentioned him. 34 years of auditing had taught me one lesson above all others. Memory convinces, documentation proves. 3 days later, something happened that finally gave me my first real piece of evidence. A certified envelope arrived. Return address? Charleston Probate Services. That immediately caught my attention. I hadn't filed anything with probate court. Inside was a notice requesting additional documentation regarding a potential future guardianship petition. Potential. Future. Not active. Someone had already contacted the court. The petition itself hadn't been filed, but inquiries had begun. Benjamin had been right. They were laying the groundwork, step by careful step. I drove directly to his office. Benjamin read every page without speaking. Finally, he placed the documents on his desk. "They're moving faster than I expected. Can they actually do this?" "They can try." "And if they succeed?" He didn't answer immediately. "If a judge believes you're mentally incapable," he folded his hands, "someone else could legally control nearly every financial decision you make." The words settled over the room like cold rain. Not because they surprised me, because they were entirely legal. No forged court order, no stolen password. just enough carefully planted doubt. Benjamin reached into his desk drawer. "I want you to do something unusual." He handed me a small digital recorder. "Carry this." I thought recordings weren't always admissible. They aren't always, he smiled. But memories fade much faster than audio. I slipped it into my purse. I hope I never need it. I think you will. Saturday afternoon, Danielle invited me to lunch, a waterfront cafe overlooking the marina, one of Arthur's favorite places. That detail wasn't accidental. She wanted me comfortable. Comfortable people are easier to persuade. Scott was already waiting when I arrived. He stood to pull out my chair. "Good to see you, Clara." "You too." His smile was flawless. It always had been. If charm were currency, Scott would have been a billionaire. Lunch began pleasantly. Weather, tourists, Olivia's university, Charleston traffic. Then Danielle leaned forward. "Mom." There it was. Whenever conversations began with that tone, something was coming. "We've been thinking." Dangerous words. Scott placed a leather folder on the table. "I know paperwork isn't your favorite topic." I almost laughed. Paperwork had been my favorite topic for 3 decades. Danielle opened the folder. "We met with an estate planning specialist." "I already have one." "This is different." "How?" "It would simply make things easier." She slid a document toward me. "Just temporary authority." I didn't touch it. Scott smiled reassuringly. "It only allows Danielle to help if you ever forget something." Forget. There was that word again. Always gentle, always casual, always repeated. I looked down at the document. Durable financial power of attorney. Prepared, ready for signature, already notarized except for mine. Interesting. Very interesting. They hadn't come hoping I'd agree. They'd come expecting I would. "I'll have Benjamin review it." Silence. Scott recovered first. "That's really not necessary. It always is." Danielle forced a smile. "Mom, I'd never signed legal paperwork without my attorney. You trust him more than us?" I looked directly at my daughter. "I trust process." That answer disappointed both of them. Good. People reveal themselves most clearly after disappointment. As lunch ended, Danielle excused herself to answer a phone call. She stepped several yards away. Scott remained at the table. For the first time, we were alone. He leaned closer. "Can I give you some advice?" "You just did." His smile thinned. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." My pulse remained steady. "Am I?" "We're only trying to protect you." "From what?" He looked toward the harbor. "From the future." I studied his face. There was no warmth now, only calculation. Then he quietly added, "Eventually, everyone needs someone else to make decisions." I smiled politely. "Eventually," he nodded. "Exactly." At that moment, Danielle returned. The conversation ended, but one sentence continued echoing in my head. "Eventually, everyone needs someone else to make decisions." It wasn't concern, it wasn't comfort, it was expectation, and expectations usually come from plans already in motion. That evening, Olivia appeared at my front door without calling. She looked pale, almost frightened. "I found something." She held up her laptop. "I wasn't looking for it." "What did you find?" She took a slow breath. "I think Mom and Dad have been planning this for months." She turned the screen toward me. My heart skipped a beat. On the display was a spreadsheet, not family photos, not financial records. A spreadsheet, color-coded, dated, with my name across the top. And beneath it, a timeline. Every doctor visit, every phone call, every conversation, every planned step, as though someone had been managing my life like a corporate project. And I hadn't even reached the last page yet. Olivia slowly lowered the laptop onto my kitchen table. Neither of us spoke. The room was so quiet, I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway marking each passing second. Tick, tick. She opened the spreadsheet. The title read, "Family Transition Plan, not Mom, not Grandma, not even my name, a project." I had become a project. The first column listed dates stretching back nearly 7 months. 7 months. Long before Danielle started calling more often. Long before she asked about my medication. Long before the bank. Every event had been planned. Increase weekly contact. Document repeated conversations. Encourage neighbors to report concerns. Introduce financial assistance gradually. Recommend medical evaluation. Each completed task had been highlighted in green. The final section was still incomplete. Establish durable power of attorney. File guardianship petition if necessary. Transfer financial management. I felt no anger, only disappointment. Auditors eventually learned that fraud isn't emotional. It's procedural. Apparently, so was betrayal. Olivia looked as though she might cry. I'm sorry, you didn't do this. I should have noticed. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You noticed before anyone else. She nodded. I copied everything. Everything? She handed me a flash drive. They keep all their business files in a shared cloud account. And this was there? It wasn't even hidden. I almost smiled. Overconfidence. Every investigation eventually reaches the moment when intelligent people begin believing they're too intelligent to get caught. That moment had finally arrived. The next morning, Benjamin examined every file: emails, checklists, calendar reminders, meeting notes. He removed his glasses and slowly leaned back in his chair. I've practiced law for 41 years. And? I've never seen someone create evidence against themselves this thoroughly. They planned everything. They documented everything. He looked directly at me. And now, he tapped the flash drive, we document them. 3 days later, Benjamin called. I've arranged something. What? Victor Langston moved tomorrow's investment presentation to the Charleston Harbor Club. The same presentation Scott has been preparing? Exactly. I don't understand. You will. Benjamin smiled. Victor deserves to know who he's trusting with several $1 million. The Harbor Club overlooked the marina. Crystal chandeliers, dark wood walls, 40 or 50 guests, investors, bank executives, attorneys, business owners. Exactly the kind of audience Scott wanted. Exactly the kind he feared most. Scott stood confidently beside a large presentation screen. Danielle greeted guests with perfect smiles. Neither of them expected to see me. When Danielle noticed me entering beside Benjamin, her smile disappeared for only a fraction of a second. Then it returned. Almost. Scott began his presentation. Market trends, investment opportunities, projected returns. He was polished, confident, convincing. People nodded. Several took notes. Then Victor Langston stood. Before we continue, he looked toward Benjamin. I understand there's a legal matter that concerns one of today's guests. Scott frowned. Danielle slowly turned toward us. Benjamin didn't move. Instead, he looked at me. Clara. The room became silent. I stood, straightened my jacket, and carried one ordinary gray folder to the front of the room, the same kind of folder I'd carried into hundreds of audits. No drama, no raised voice, just paper. My name is Clara Whitmore. Several people smiled politely. I spent 34 years auditing federal contractors. I placed the folder on the table. One lesson stayed with me. I opened the folder. When someone tells you a story, I removed the first document. Always compare it with the paperwork. Benjamin connected Olivia's flash drive to the projector. The spreadsheet filled the screen. A quiet murmur spread across the room. Scott's face turned white. Danielle didn't move. I spoke calmly. This timeline wasn't created by me. Click. A page appeared. Weekly objectives. Click. Doctor appointments. Click. Bank visits. Click. Plans to convince neighbors I suffered from memory loss. Click. Draft guardianship strategy. Every click made the room quieter. No one interrupted. No one needed to. The documents spoke far more clearly than I ever could. Scott suddenly stepped forward. "This is completely out of context." Benjamin looked at him. "Then provide the proper context." Scott opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Victor Langston slowly turned toward him. "Did you prepare these files?" Scott hesitated. "1 second. 2. That hesitation answered every question. Then Danielle spoke. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She wasn't speaking to me. She was speaking to herself." Tears filled her eyes. "We only needed time." Scott looked at her. "Don't." She ignored him. "We were going to fix everything." Victor frowned. "Fix what?" Danielle closed her eyes. Scott's investment firm had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in unauthorized speculative trades. The upcoming audit would expose everything. They believed controlling my assets would allow them to replace the missing money before anyone discovered the losses. They never intended to keep it forever. Just long enough. Long enough. Every financial scandal in history has used those exact words. Jonathan Pierce, the financial regulator attending the presentation, quietly stood. "I believe this meeting is over." He walked directly toward Scott. "I'll need your firm's records immediately." Scott didn't argue. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. Not because he'd been exposed, because he finally understood the evidence couldn't be explained away. Danielle approached me after everyone else had left. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. "I never wanted to hurt you." I believed she meant it. That was the tragedy. People rarely wake up intending to destroy their families. They simply convince themselves the next compromise is temporary. Then the next, and the next, until they no longer recognize themselves. "I know," I said quietly. She began crying. "I thought I could fix it before you ever found out. You underestimated one thing." "What?" I looked at the gray folder still resting in my hands. "I spent my entire life finding mistakes that other people believed no one would ever notice." 6 months later, Scott lost his financial license. Criminal charges followed. Danielle accepted a plea agreement related to the fraudulent guardianship scheme and cooperated with investigators. She was spared prison. But she lost her career. Olivia finished journalism school. Her first published investigative article wasn't about politics or corporations. It was about financial abuse against older adults. I framed it. It's hanging in my study today. Right above the filing cabinet Danielle once wanted to replace. Every morning I still drink my coffee on the front porch. The house is quieter now, but it isn't lonely. There's a difference. Loneliness comes from losing people. Peace comes from finally knowing which people remain. If this story made you wonder how easily trust can be manipulated behind closed doors, I'd like to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if your own family had tried to take control of your life for your own good?